Hello everybody, I'm Eternal Flame here, and today I wanted to cover a what if that has been on my mind for a while now, which that what if is, of course, what if Yuji had started out with blood manipulation, or what if Yuji awoke blood manipulation early? Now normally I would bring us immediately into the story, start out with narrating all that good jazz after explaining the scenario. However, there is one thing I do need to note, because this is a very weird occurrence that doesn't really happen in most of my videos, where I'm going to have to start out with a massive spoiler warning because there is several manga spoilers. Normally my what ifs is either pretty clear when it covers the manga parts, or just the fact that we're not actually in the manga yet. So yeah, spoilers ahead. Anyway, that should be long enough, so let's get started. Our story begins far before anything happened in JJK, far before our original timeline started, far before JJK 0, even far before Gojo had fought Toji. In this timeline, Kenjaku had done a little bit more research than he did on the death paintings, as he had an idea. He wanted to make sure this boy was a strong vessel and cage for Ryoma and Sukuna. However, he wasn't too sure if this boy was going to awaken a curse technique or not, so he decided to guarantee it. As not just did Kenjaku infuse one of Ryoma and Sukuna's fingers in him, he also infused several of the death painting parts inside of Yuji. As now a small part of every single death painting was present inside of Yuji Itadori, changing his body to be that of a death painting, as well as the physical strength buff that Yuji got from having one of the fingers sealed inside of him for so long. This also led to a situation that Kenjaku set up to make sure that the death paintings did get captured by Jujutsu sorcerers. As the death paintings were still alive, they just had a piece of them missing that they could recover easily later on. After Kenjaku was done, he left. As tempted as he was to train the boy from scratch, they wanted to see how far Yuji would go with blood manipulation. After all, 3 of the siblings seemed to have a natural talent for it, so he wondered if Yuji would be the same since he has parts of all 9 siblings and how this would end up developing. He wanted to see the power Yuji would naturally develop. This leads to some changes in the start of the timeline happening rather early. The first change is pretty simple. Yuji can naturally see cursed spirits now and already starts with cursed energy. Due to being born with a technique, he naturally awoke his cursed energy. However, he has no one to teach him properly how to use his cursed energy reinforcement to its utmost. So he has the natural usage of it already, but he's not too skilled with it yet. 2. Yuji sometimes can sense and talk to people in his dreams, people that have told him that they are his 10th sibling, which he doesn't actually know even if these dreams are real or just something of his subconscious. Unknown to him, he is accidentally using the blood connection ability to talk mainly to Choso, Eso, and Kechizu, but he does also end up talking to his other brothers as well. While Yuji does try and tell his grandfather about them, his grandfather just tells him it's a kid dreaming thing. Finally, there are abilities we need to discuss. Which abilities would Yuji have access to? Well, for the sake of not making him too busted in the start, he is only going to have Flowing Red Scale Stack, Blood Meteorite, and Blood Edge. Mainly just hand-to-hand techniques, as that seems to be Yuji's main talent. Furthermore, while Yuji is trying to learn more about his gift, he doesn't like using it too much. A mix of him not really having much desire to be a fighter, as well as his grandfather wanting to make sure that his curse technique was more hidden. Not much changes in the rest of the timeline. Hidden inventory and JJK 0 all go pretty similar to canon. However, where things start to change is JJK itself. Megumi is sent out to get one of Sukuna's fingers that has been spotted recently. Gojo of course was with him, which was the reason why they didn't send out more sorcerers besides Gojo of course. However, Gojo was getting food, so yeah, he was of no help really. When Megumi first met Yuji though, he was immediately able to sense the curse energy Yuji had. Not just the residues from the finger, but also the fact that Yuji was a sorcerer, and unregistered one at that, which did confuse him. After all, not just did he have immense physical strength that surpassed even Maki without curse energy, but he had a curse technique too. This was a first. Before Megumi could even reach Yuji though, Yuji had already ran in quite a hurry to get to the hospital, using his curse technique Flowing Red Scale to get there even faster because of the hurry he was in. Megumi was already somewhat confused. He also had noticed a grade 2 curse around and wondered if this was because of Sukuna or not. Yuji had went to visit Wasuke, hearing that this was his last words. While Wasuke was about to tell Yuji about his parents, Yuji told him already that he didn't care. This was when Wasuke gave his final words. However, he did make sure to add one more thing before he left, which was telling Yuji his siblings in his dreams were real and they wanted nothing more than to help it. Call it an old man's instinct. This left Yuji both feeling sad about this while also feeling curious. He wanted to go to sleep soon, see if he could reconnect with those dreams. However, after signing a form, he met with Megumi. This led to eventually Megumi and Yuji going back to the school, while Megumi on the way there gave a brief explanation on cursed energy. He had to admit he was surprised that Yuji, despite having a curse technique, doesn't actually know what cursed energy is. He also told him that his technique was blood manipulation. However, this time when they arrived, they saw what was shock to them. A massive cursed spirit that was in the shape of a serpent around the school that seemed to be chasing two people down in hopes of getting a finger. A grade 1 level cursed spirit that Kenjaku had sent out in order to make sure that what was going to happen would happen. Both members of the occult club were currently trying to hide and run for their lives, having already unsealed the Sukuna finger, which was what the cursed spirit seemed to be after. Sakashi was already injured and Setsuko was running out of stamina and getting tired. This was when Nue slammed into the cursed spirit, while at the same time Yuji hopped into the building, picked up the both of them, and jumped out, taking them out of the building and leaving both Yuji and Megumi to have to fight against the cursed spirit. Unlike in canon where Megumi told Yuji to stay outside, in this timeline he saw Yuji as a necessary ally, mainly thanks to his ability to use blood manipulation and curse energy already. While Yuji wasn't experienced in combat against higher end cursed spirits like this one, so was Megumi, so they both needed to make sure that they were going to win and have each other's backs. As Yuji immediately started out by using Flowing Red Scale with his immense amount of physical strength and speed to jump at the cursed spirit with a massive amount of speed, one that exceeded Megumi by a long shot. As Yuji went for a punch on the cursed spirit's eye, while at the same time Megumi summoned Orochi in order to slam the cursed spirit into the wall. However, with a whip of its tail was able to launch Yuji and Orochi away from them, as Yuji was quickly able to get back up, with Megumi summoning both of his dogs in order to back Yuji up. Yuji and the wolves ended up jumping onto the spirit's head and beginning to punch down the spirit's head. Yuji at the same time used Blood Edge to make a sword of blood to repeatedly stab at the cursed spirit. While Megumi tried to use Nue in order to launch a burst of lightning and slam down on the cursed spirit, trying to force it to stay still so Yuji could try and repeatedly land hits on it as well as his dogs. But even with those strikes, while they did do damage, it wasn't enough to put this thing down, as Yuji quickly stood in the way in order to defend the dogs while using Blood Meteorite to heavily amplify his durability as they were all launched down into the ground. This is when the serpent attempted to do a charge on Megumi to try and slam into him, but Yuji was quick enough to activate Flowing Red Scale Stack and slam into the cursed spirit, slamming it into a wall. Now that speed was inhuman. Megumi was pretty sure in that instance that Yuji might have actually been the same speed, if not a bit faster than Nanami Kento. However, Yuji very quickly deactivated Flowing Red Scale Stack, explaining that he can only really use that in bursts, he can't actually use that all the time. However, this cursed spirit was far from done, as it wrapped its tail around Yuji and slammed him into the ground hard, before slamming him into Megumi and breaking the wall of the school. The cursed spirit was about to try and charge on the wolves as well, but Megumi was quick to deactivate them, as it knew if that actually succeeded then the wolves would end up dying. He also deactivated Nue and Orochi. Megumi began to attempt to think of a new plan, but they didn't have that time to think, as that cursed spirit instead decided to slam its massive body weight right down on Yuji and Megumi. This led to Megumi summoning Orochi once more, with a mix of Yuji uppercutting the cursed spirit, launching the cursed spirit away. However, while they were able to launch it away, the damage they did to the cursed spirit was only minor. Furthermore, even though it was being launched, it was able to counterattack by wrapping its tail around Megumi and slamming him into the ground as well, as it began to coil its tail around Megumi even tighter, aiming to end Megumi's life right here and now. Yuji didn't have enough power. He didn't have the power necessary to free Megumi or save him, as he was thinking on what he could do, trying to find some solution, but there was one solution that came to mind. He needed more power, and he himself was not strong enough to do so yet. He himself wasn't strong enough to save Megumi. So this led to Yuji consuming the Finger of Sukuna, becoming the new vessel of Ryomen Sukuna. As Ryomen Sukuna has now reawakened in this modern era, with the cursed spirit immediately letting go of Megumi and rushing at Sukuna, seeing Sukuna as the immediate threat. They wanted to kill Sukuna, but when they tried, they were sliced apart into pieces before being disintegrated into ashes. But it didn't take long until after Yuji had regained control over his body, forcing Sukuna back down. He was doing so even faster than he would do normally, but that was because of a mixture of the fact he had a stronger body while also having curse energy right off the bat. Sukuna in that moment had to question who this Yuji Itadori brat was. However, he was a bit more suspicious about this than he would be normally. Not just did Yuji have better physicals than most humans, but he also had a body that was a mix of a curse and human. This had Kenjaku written all over it, but Sukuna decided to stay quiet about this. Before Megumi could summon Mahoraga, Gojo had arrived, as Gojo was even more curious about Yuji thanks to his circumstances. In Gojo's confidence, he decided why not let Sukuna challenge him for a bit. He wanted to see how strong Sukuna was and to see if Yuji could really control Sukuna. Megumi questioned for a moment this was really a good idea considering Yuji also had a curse technique already, but Gojo said it would be fine. Yuji then gave control back to Sukuna for a moment, for 10 seconds, as Sukuna immediately activated Flowing Red Scale Stack. Mix that with Sukuna's curse energy and he was significantly faster than he was normally. In terms of speed, he would be even faster than when he fought Megumi back in the detention center. However, this speed wasn't a problem for Gojo. As Sukuna went for a Clawed Strike on Gojo, however Gojo was able to spin around the Clawed Strike, causing Sukuna to trip as he moved to sit down on Sukuna's back. This caused Sukuna to launch out a wave of slashes towards Gojo as Gojo hopped back, moving his hands into his pockets in the process as he avoided the slashes, looking pretty cool in the process. But Sukuna clapped his hands together, remembering a technique he had seen back in the Heian era, Piercing Blood, as he fired out a burst of compressed blood right at Gojo. However, this wasn't really an issue to Gojo, as Gojo's Infinity stopped the piercing blood, as he blinked to himself thinking that was fast. While he started to count down as Yuji retook control over his body, Gojo had to admit he was impressed that Yuji could actually manage to take control back from the King of Curses of all people. After this fight, it didn't take long for Yuji to faint, being completely exhausted from everything that had just happened today. As Yuji reawoke in a picnic area, one that he had been in so many times. However, this time, it was a little bit different, as there wasn't actually all 9 of his brothers, but just one of them there, which was Choso. At first, Yuji was confused at why it was only Choso, as every single time he had one of these dreams, it had always been with all of his brothers, so why only Choso? Why was Choso the only one here, as Choso explained something to Yuji. Choso explained that he wasn't too sure if Sukuna could interfere with the connection or not. Even at one finger of power, he was still too strong for most of them. He might have even been too strong for Choso, but just by sending out Choso, they wanted to be careful. They wanted to make sure that most of the brothers wouldn't be harmed, and Choso was pretty certain that he would be the one who would take the least amount of damage. Or at least that he would be able to take the damage the best in case Sukuna could interfere. However, it did seem like Sukuna couldn't really interfere in this mindscape. At least based on what they could tell, Sukuna could not interfere. Unknown to them, Sukuna was stealthily listening in that moment, as he was always listening and he was curious where this was going to go, but he also just made his presence not known at all, mainly because he did want to see, but he didn't want to interrupt. As Choso explained to him that Yuji was a death painting, and that Yuji was now going to become a Jujutsu sorcerer, however he could not tell the other sorcerers that he was a death painting. If they knew not just was he the vessel of Sukuna, but also that he was half curse, half person, they would more than likely want to execute him significantly more than they already do. In truth, Choso didn't really want Yuji to become a sorcerer. He did not want that world for him. He wanted Yuji to have a somewhat normal life. Of course, Yuji was going to have blood manipulation and get better and stronger, but all he really wanted was for Yuji to have a normal life. After all, Choso and his brothers wanted what was best for them. Of course, Choso and his brothers at first thought they would have to work with curses because a cursed world was more better for them than a human world. However, their brother Yuji was one that lived in a human world, and a human world was much more fitting for them. So if a human world was more fitting for Yuji, then of course they wanted the best for Yuji. This was when Choso then explained to Yuji that he was going to need to get much stronger from here on out. The issue was that Choso couldn't really help him that much. One of the biggest things that Choso always wanted to do was teach Yuji how to fight, teach Yuji how to use these techniques. However, he got them too instinctually. While he could somewhat help with the hand-to-hand techniques that Yuji had picked up, he couldn't really help too much with the other range techniques that he really wanted to teach Yuji, other than maybe Supernova, but even then that wouldn't work considering the fact that Yuji had not picked up on using Convergence yet. So he told Yuji that he was going to have to find his own path of blood manipulation as well as curse energy, and he was going to have to get stronger on his own, and maybe one day they could actually end up meeting properly. As he dropped a final secret, which was the fact that his brothers were actually stored in the vault in Jujutsu High. However, currently they were in containers, and it wouldn't be best to actually tell Gojo or the others that that was the case, mainly because they didn't want them to be aware of the fact that they were there. Since this would make it very clear that Yuji was a death painting after all, and that would be the worst case scenario for Yuji. And Sukuna, upon hearing the confirmation that Yuji was a death painting, was able to immediately confirm his suspicion that Kenjaku was behind Yuji's existence. However, there wasn't really much more to discuss over the dreams, so instead the two of them began to discuss how Yuji really felt about what had happened today. Yuji had felt a mixture of emotions. He was of course still sad about his grandfather dying. After all, that was his only family member left aside from his brothers. He was still shocked to learn about the entire world of Jujutsu sorcery. After all, he was aware of curse energy, but he just thought he was a normal person. He didn't think there was anything more to this world, and he just thought he was a normal person with special gifts. However, no, there is an entire world of Jujutsu sorcery, but most of all, he wanted to learn more so he could help give people good deaths. And that was what he was going to drive himself to do, which Choso was proud of his brother for deciding that was his goal, and he was going to encourage him as best he could. This then leads to Yuji waking up and getting the whole explanation from Gojo, with that entire part going the same, as well as the Repugnite curse with Nobara battling against it, mainly because that was made for Nobara to show off, so Yuji doesn't really change that much about it. However, Nobara won't call him a clueless normie, mainly because of the fact that Yuji's not a clueless normie since he starts out with blood manipulation, he knows what curse energy is, and he knew what curses were. It was the fact that he didn't know what the Jujutsu system was and how it functioned. However, the next change comes at the Detention Center, when Yuji and Megumi encounter the Finger Bearer. I still see Yuji telling Megumi to run in order to get help, while he himself fights against the Finger Bearer in a 1v1. The battle started with Yuji activating Flowing Red Scale right off the bat. After all, he could already sense that if he weren't to go all out, then he wouldn't stand a single chance against the Finger Bearer. Yuji started the fight by attempting to go for a punch straight on its face before going for a kick on its chest, trying to start out with some initial damage. However, the punch on its chin wasn't blocked, and the kick on its chest also wasn't blocked either. And while the chest and the chin of the Finger Bearer was moved back a slight bit by the punches, the Finger Bearer had barely moved from those strikes. Even the Grade 1 Curse Spirit that Yuji and Megumi had fought a while ago did move and was staggered a bit by Yuji's strikes, but this thing, this special grade curse, it was on a completely different level. This was when the curse began its counter-strike by launching out a wave of curse energy, launching Yuji back, and while Yuji was being launched, the cursed spirit appeared behind Yuji and grabbed him by his head before slamming him hard into the ground. Yuji was able to just barely on time activate Blood Meteorite on his head in order to minimize the damage, but even with that said, he ended up taking some damage and the Blood Meteorite shattered. However, the Finger Bearer wasn't done with its assault yet, as it grabbed Yuji by the leg and began to repeatedly slam Yuji on the ground with his leg, slamming him down over and over again with each of those strikes hurting, and Yuji hated this. He hated the fact that he wasn't able to do anything at all. He felt so weak, so pathetic, before the cursed spirit finally finished its attack and slammed Yuji into a wall before launching out a small burst of curse energy as a final finishing blow, thinking that that would have killed Yuji. And in that moment, several emotions began to flood into Yuji as he began to question how was he ever supposed to accomplish his goal if he was just so weak. But Yuji did still have access to one more move. It was risky to use, but he was going to make sure to give one final last stand, as he focused all of his curse energy towards his arm, while at the same time activating Flowing Red Scale Stack. As Yuji had sped up even more, rushing straight towards the cursed spirit in an attempt to punch it in the chest. However, the cursed spirit ended up catching the fist, before releasing a wave of curse energy, this one much stronger, and destroying Yuji's arm completely. While Yuji was previously feeling determination, now he was feeling two emotions, pain and fear. A fear that he was about to die, as it hit for Yuji. In that moment, he was about to die, and there was nothing else he could do. He didn't even get close to accomplishing his goal. But he had another option, as in that moment, Yuji gave in. He gave up control, allowing Sukuna to have control over his body, and then most of this ends up going the exact same. However, Sukuna was able to notice that his hand regenerated even faster than he was expecting. Of course, Sukuna already had unnatural RCT speed, but even with that being said, he had an even faster RCT when it came to Yuji in specific, before he realized that it was more than likely because of the fact that he didn't need to spend as much energy because his body naturally converted CE into blood. This does lead into the rest of the Detention Center going the same, including the conflict with Megumi. However, Megumi is also able to note that Sukuna is able to move as fast as he was when he fought against Gojo without even using blood manipulation, as Sukuna chose not to use blood manipulation in his battle against Megumi, mainly because it wasn't really necessary. This does result in Yuji needing to fake his death and making the same binding vow that he made with Sukuna originally. Even though he does try and use blood manipulation in their fight, it doesn't really change that much. This does lead into Yuji and Gojo doing the movie training, however Yuji does it significantly faster in comparison to what he does in canon. Like, around the time they are done the first movie, he is already going to be completed with the entire training. This is mainly because of the fact that Yuji already had some curse energy training beforehand, as well as training with his curse technique. However, there is one more important thing that Gojo does note, which is it's more than likely possible that Yuji is going to end up awakening Shrine. After all, he already saw through Sukuna that it was possible for Sukuna to use two curse techniques being his own, as well as the one that Yuji had, so we believe it should be possible that Yuji should also be capable of awakening Shrine eventually as well, and just being able to wield the two curse techniques. However, Yuji does spend the rest of the time continuing to train to control his curse energy and emotions. He needed to get stronger and he was going to make sure he got it perfectly. That was until Gojo showed up, grabbed Yuji, and teleported himself over to Jogo. This also leads into the confrontation with Jogo going nearly the exact same as well. However, Yuji in particular is more interested about the aspects of a domain, mainly because of the fact that he already has a curse technique that he is rather experienced with, so Yuji wondered if it was possible for him to eventually learn how to awaken a domain himself, while he also set Jogo as a goalpost even more. The rest of the confrontation ends up going the same, with Jogo escaping, and eventually Yuji being dropped off to Nanami in order to learn even more about curse energy from him before the start of the Goodwill Festival. While Yuji did have good techniques, it was clear that his fundamentals needed more and more time to train and flourish, which he figured a mission with Nanami would help a lot with. Now, most of this arc does end up going the exact same as well. Of course, there is some part of Nanami that is questioning why Yuji was brought to him and not some other blood manipulation user. However, that part was quickly answered, as it was pretty clear they wanted to make sure that Yuji being alive was kept a secret from now, and they knew that if the Kamo clan knew about it, then the higher-ups would certainly know about it as well. However, the part of this that really begins to change everything is when Yuji ends up battling against Mahito out of anger after Junpei had just been killed. Sukuna and Mahito were laughing at him for caring about a life, laughing at him for wanting to reach out to Sukuna and being this desperate. They couldn't help but find it funny, and the worst part about it all was Mahito was spouting about how the fact that Yuji couldn't hurt him. However, a moment before Mahito could even start his sentence, almost as if Yuji had teleported, he appeared right in front of Mahito and punched him in the chest, and this was a hard-hitting punch, as Mahito was launched back and launched into the wall, causing a crack in the wall to form. Of course, Mahito at first thought that he was going to take no damage, until he suddenly felt something that caught him off guard. Pain. He felt quite a bit of pain from that strike. Furthermore, in front of him was Yuji Itadori with a massive amount of curse energy surrounding his body from his rage. But not just that, he also had markings on him. Markings from flowing red scale stack. As Yuji was now on the offensive, not giving Mahito a single moment to recover, as he immediately closed the distance again and punched Mahito in the head, or at least aimed a punch for his head that ended up breaking the wall completely. Mahito was just barely able to change his form on time to make a form more fitting for speed by changing his legs to be more horse-like. He was just narrowly able to avoid the strike from Yuji, and he realized just how outmatched he was in this moment. Not just was Yuji a natural predator already, but Yuji had a curse technique that allowed him to amplify those physical strikes. However, to be put in such a disadvantageous position was something that was genuinely inspiring to Mahito. He wanted to have more fun. As the two opponents began to strategize, Mahito realizing that he would need to keep a distance, and Yuji realizing he was going to need to close that distance and fast, which allowed Yuji to make the next move. Unfortunately for Mahito, making an opponent that was this much faster than him was going to be a difficult task, as Yuji immediately went in for a punch on Mahito's gut, which was followed up by a punch on his chest as he began to land a barrage of strikes on Mahito. Each of these strikes hit like a truck, and they were causing so much damage to Mahito's soul until Mahito got an idea, as he predicted the next spot that Yuji was about to go for on his body, and instead changed that spot to be a spike. However, Mahito was unaware of one of the advantages that flowing red scale stack offered, which was amped up perception, as Yuji was able to see it coming, and instead he ended up changing what he was going for, which resulted in Yuji punching Mahito straight in the jaw, launching him out of the building. As Mahito was being launched, Yuji attempted to activate a move that he had explained to him in the past by his brothers, which that move was Piercing Blood. However, even in this rage state, he wasn't actually able to fully launch out a Piercing Blood, just launching out a beam of blood that wasn't anywhere near as fast as it needed to be, allowing Mahito to actually and give himself a moment to breathe. This resulted in Mahito shifting both of his arms to be like spiked balls that he attempted to throw at Yuji, which Yuji caught both of them before they could even reach him. However, even though Yuji had caught them, spikes ended up rising out from those arms that he had caught in order to try and impale Yuji, and normally someone would feel that pain and let go. However, Yuji was Yuji Itadori. As then Yuji used his arms to pull Mahito towards him, allowing him to punch Mahito in the face before grabbing him by both of the legs and throwing him down and slamming him down into the ground. But Mahito saw this as the perfect opportunity as he attempted to use Idol Transfiguration on Yuji, but that didn't work. Not because of Yuji, but because of Sukuna. Furthermore, to make things even worse, Mahito had just made a mistake, as he allowed Yuji to have an opening, which Yuji very much took advantage of by landing a hard punch on Mahito's gut. But Yuji wasn't quite done yet, as Yuji followed that up by punching him repeatedly in the chest and face while he was being launched before he jumped back himself. As Mahito began to think on what he could use as inspiration for this, he knew a domain wouldn't work, not against someone like Yuji. Yuji right now was just too strong for him thanks to flowing red scale stack. However, he then began to see something interesting, which was the marks actually began to change on Yuji. Instead of being flowing red scale stack, they were just normal flowing red scale. Yuji couldn't use flowing red scale stack for long. Of course, he had figured out how to use it for longer than he was able to use it for originally, but he couldn't use it for too long, even in this angered state. But with that being said, Yuji had certainly left his mark by this point, and then Nanami also showed up. This wasn't good. He felt like he was about to die. Mahito needed to escape, and now, which led to Mahito begin to expand his body, almost like he was gonna blow himself up, but when he did, he popped like a balloon, which allowed him to escape through one of the sewers. And Mahito in that moment made sure of one thing: the next time he saw Yuji, he was going to break his resolve and break him completely. After all, Yuji had humiliated him, so he was going to make sure he returned that favor tenfold.